The United States carries a national debt exceeding $34 trillion, alongside persistent, massive trade deficits. Typically, a country printing money to cover shortfalls of this scale would see its currency value drop and inflation spike. Yet, the U.S. military remains unrivaled, its financial markets the most liquid, and the dollar the world's reserve. This stability is not merely a byproduct of military strength. It relies on a specific financial arrangement established in the desert in 1974. It is the petrodollar, a system where the world's most traded commodity, crude oil, is priced and settled almost exclusively in U.S. dollars. This pricing mechanism functions as a self-sustaining loop, allowing the U.S. to operate outside standard economic constraints by capturing global energy trade to finance its own government spending. In 1971, the U.S. was struggling to finance the Vietnam War and expanding domestic programs. To stop the drain on its resources, President Nixon abandoned the gold standard, leaving the dollar floating and vulnerable to devaluation. 2 years later, the 1973 oil embargo quadrupled energy prices. Gas lines stretched for miles, and the global economy stalled, exposing the extreme energy dependence of the West. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger brokered a solution with the world's largest oil producer. The U.S. offered Saudi Arabia advanced military hardware and a security guarantee against regional adversaries. In return, Saudi Arabia agreed to price all of its oil exports exclusively in U.S. dollars, a standard quickly adopted by the rest of OPEC. This agreement effectively shifted the U.S. dollar from being backed by gold to being backed by crude oil, anchoring American economic dominance for the next 50 years. Because oil is essential, energy-importing countries must first convert their wealth into U.S. dollars. This creates an enormous surplus for Gulf oil exporting nations. To protect this wealth, they reinvest these dollars into U.S. Treasury bonds. This return of capital is petrodollar recycling. By purchasing these bonds, foreign nations directly lend the U.S. government money. This closed loop allows Washington to borrow at low costs and finance its military without the risk of domestic hyperinflation. This leverage provides a powerful political tool. Because global energy transactions run through dollar-based banking networks, the U.S. can cut off adversaries from the energy trade by simply removing their access to those dollars. Petrodollar recycling is a self-sustaining system where the world's requirement for energy automatically provides the capital needed to finance American global power. After 50 years of stability, this arrangement is fracturing. In 2024, Saudi Arabia allowed its original petrodollar exclusivity agreement to expire, moving toward a multi-currency model for oil sales. Emerging economies are actively building a workaround. The expanded BRICS alliance, now including major producers like the UAE and Iran, is coordinating trade in local currencies to bypass U.S. monetary control. China is leading this shift with the Petroyuan, a long-term strategy to convince oil producers to settle energy trades directly in Chinese currency. In early 2026, the Strait of Hormuz became a test for this new order. Safe passage was selectively granted to tankers settling in yuan, while dollar-settled ships faced rerouting and massive insurance spikes. Settling oil in alternative currencies removes the requirement for nations to hold dollars. This process starves the recycling loop of the foreign capital the U.S. Treasury relies on to manage its massive debt. Beyond geopolitical rivalries, the system faces a structural threat from the global energy transition itself. As the world shifts towards solar, wind, and electric vehicles, total reliance on crude oil will eventually peak and decline. This creates a chain reaction. As the world requires less oil, there is a permanent structural reduction in global demand for U.S. dollars. The U.S. dollar is not collapsing tomorrow. Its deep markets and liquidity ensure it remains the dominant reserve currency for now. However, the era of uncontested U.S. hegemony, supported by a global monopoly on oil trade, is giving way. America must now navigate a multipolar financial world where the dollar is no longer the mandatory medium for the planet's energy.